Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is the author of a series of juvenile fiction books and one nonfiction how-to book for authors called Schools, a Niche Market for Authors. In 2022, she co-authored her sixth juvenile fiction book called Finding Family Treasure that encourages young readers to discover their family's roots and learn about the melting pot that is America, both past and present. She's a former teacher, newspaper reporter, and television producer who weaves history and science into stories for young readers ages 8 to 14. She has a BA from the University of Florida and a master's in education from the University of North Florida. She serves as the past president of the Florida Authors and Publishers Association. Welcome, Jane R. Wood, to Authors Over 50.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jane, our first question on Authors Over 50 is always the same. Why did you wait so long to write your first book?
Why not? Actually, my story is rather interesting. I had said when I was first teaching a long time ago, probably 60 some years ago, no, it can't be 60 some years ago. I guess it's 50 some years ago, that I wanted to write a kid's book someday. And I got downsized from my corporate job in 2000, and that seemed to be the someday. And I said, well, what am I going to do now? And so I sat down and started working on my very first book. It didn't come out until 2004 because I took another job in between, but I kept working on the book. And it was finally published in 2004. And once that happened, I was smitten. I couldn't stop writing. So that's how it worked for me. A dream that happened many, many years ago, and then an opportunity that presented itself. I kind of made lemon out of lemonade, I guess you'd say.
Well, tell us about your publishing journey, what it took to get that book published.
It was an interesting journey. As I just mentioned, I took another job after I lost my corporate job that I thought I would be there forever. I would retire from that position. And it was interesting because what I did, nobody else could do, but the company got bought out. And the new company said, we're not going to do that. So I started working on writing my first book just to see if I could do it. It was more of a creative endeavor. And I was very fortunate because there was a local company, a small publishing company that had just come to Northeast Florida. And when I started talking to our local newspaper book reviewer about books and getting published and how that works, she said, I have a feeling you've written a book. And I said, well, I'm working on something. She said, let me give you a card. And she connected me with this small publishing company that was in St. Augustine, actually. And so they published my first book, and I learned so much from them. But after a few years, they decided to quit accepting new authors, and they were going into several different branches of business, website development, marketing. And they said, we really don't want to publish any more books, but we can find you another publisher, because my first book took off, was very popular with schools, particularly in the state of Florida. But they said, we really think you ought to start your own company. We think you ought to self-publish. And at that point, that was in 2007, I said, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't want to deal with ISBNs and sales tax and, all the challenges. And back then, there weren't a lot of readily available resources for self-publishing. But I decided, okay, why not? My husband and my older son, who has an MBA, said, hey, Mom, I can set up the Excel sheets so it makes sense for you that it's Jane friendly. Because I kept maintaining, I'm a word person, I don't do numbers. So I had a lot of help in the beginning and asked a lot of questions of a lot of other authors and people and organizations and persevered through it. And then, of course, today it's a whole lot easier if you're going to self-publish, particularly after you make connections with other people in the industry. That's been very, very valuable.
Yes, there are so many options today for writers. So that's very exciting to have that many options for us. But after you got that first book published, you had to do marketing, which now even the big five publishers require that their authors do their own marketing, the large percentage of it. So a lot of authors are intimidated by marketing and touting their own work. Did you market a lot? And what specifics do you think worked and some of those that didn't work?
For me, it was a natural to market to schools. I had been a school teacher. I understood how school systems operated. I spoke the language of educators. And so for me to start marketing to schools was a no-brainer. And that's where I had most of my sales, most of my success. Being a former teacher, and I taught at middle school and high school, and I realized very early that when I got kids in 7th, 8th, even 10th, 11th grade that were not reading on grade level, we'd lose them. I mean, they were losing out on their other subjects. They'd frequently drop out. And then we have all kinds of other society and community issues when that happens. So my passion was to get kids reading. And I knew if kids were going to read my books, they had to be fun. They had to be characters they could relate to. They had to be either a mystery or an adventure. And so a lot of my focus was on how I wrote my stories. And then, as we know, marketing is all about know your audience. I understood teachers and what they were looking for, and media specialists and administrators. And so for me, the marketing was very simple in the beginning. In later years now, so much of the marketing is with social media, which is hard for people of my age because I didn't grow up with it and I'm having to learn that. But it's still a matter of know your audience. When I do my social media, I'm connecting with parents, grandparents, teachers, librarians, bookstore owners. That's kind of my audience, but specifically anybody in the education area and parents and grandparents. So marketing has to be very targeted. And the big challenge for me recently has been, like everybody, COVID. I wasn't doing a lot of school visits. I wasn't doing any school visits for about 2 years. I did virtual school visits, but many books with a virtual school visit. And of course, there weren't book signings and there weren't conferences and presentations. So the marketing has been a challenge because of COVID, but things are starting to pick up again. So I'm hopeful that in the fall, I'll be doing some more school visits.
I'm fascinated with your encouragement of young people to find their own family histories. How do you instruct them to mine for those treasures?
This newest book that just came out in January, I co-authored with a genetic genealogist. Catherine and I co-wrote the book. It's interesting because we don't live in the same town, so everything was done via the internet, via email, phone calls, exchanging documents back and forth. And it was really a joy to work with her. I worked a lot on the storyline, and she worked a lot on the genealogy and the history. And the basic premise of that book is that we've got a class of fifth graders that's researching their family history. And so she comes in as a guest to the class, and she teaches the kids how to research their family history online and through websites. And then the teacher comes in and says, now I want you to go home and talk to your parents and your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles, so that they're getting both sides of the input for establishing their family history and their roots. The whole idea, again, is making it compatible with the school curriculum, because that's how I sell my books. And it's mostly fifth grade, where students are learning early American history, early founding of our country, and the American Revolution. Now, we took it one step further, because I love to weave history into my storylines. We had about 6 or 8 characters that discover, as they're researching their family roots, connections to historic events in the past. We have one young boy who finds out his early ancestors were some of the first Africans that came to Virginia in 1619. We have a young girl that finds out her great-grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, and a young boy discovers that he had relatives that disappeared during the Holocaust. One boy understands that he has Seminole Indian in his blood, and many of the kids discover their great-grandparents came through Ellis Island. So I'm able to weave that kind of history around some of these characters and their stories. And the whole idea is we want kids that read this book to want to go home and ask their parents and grandparents, well, tell me how our family came to this country. You know, how are we contributing to this melting pot that's America today?
I think that's such an intriguing premise for you to draw that history out through the stories of those students in the classroom. I think that's going to be a very popular class and book for those students. And it resonates with me so well, because I'm an adopted child, and I searched and found my birth mother, and then through DNA results, my birth father. And that's part of my first novel, is called No Names to Be Given. And it has a thread of memoir running through it. So anytime somebody's mining for their family history, my ears perk up, because I'm really fascinated by that.
And one of our characters is adopted. Initially, he's a little bit hesitant, because he says, I don't know who my relatives, my ancestors are. And because of the genealogy research you can do online today, he's able to discover who he is, who he was related to, and who he is today.
Well, thank you for including an adoptee in your story. That's very nice. You also instruct authors about becoming successful in the school market, and you're so familiar with the school market, but there are a lot of our author listeners who would like to get into the school market but haven't. So how do you advise them to do so?
Well, the most important thing about marketing your books to schools is the book has to have content in it that's compatible with what the teachers are being asked to teach in the classroom. It's got to have some reinforcement to the curriculum. So what I suggest is, and that doesn't mean it has to be straight history or straight science. It's got to have topics in there that reinforce some of those subjects. And so my first thing is to tell authors, particularly if they're still creating their book, but even if they've already written a book, find how their story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, connects to a certain grade level that's studying a certain subject. For example, if somebody's got something about World War II, find out where that is being studied and make sure you're writing to that grade level. And then that's how you're going to market that book to schools and to educators. They don't have the money or the time to read just another cute book. They have got to use resources that are reinforcing what they're teaching already. I mean, a lot of these schools today, the teachers have to submit detailed lesson plans, and they have to show how they're reinforcing the standards for that particular district or that state. And so it's just a matter of authors and publishers need to go in and do some homework themselves, research the standards for a particular state or area where they are going to market it, and find out what are the topics that they're going to be able to reinforce. Now, certainly reading is important at all levels. English and language arts, you can always talk about similes and metaphors. You can always talk about sentence structure. You can always talk about all the elements of putting a story together. But the content needs to be reinforcing something of history or science. And when you talk about those subjects, that's more than just straight science. You've got biology, you've got weather, you've got space, you've got so many different topics. And I think if authors and publishers will go in and look at the standards at a particular grade level, and many of them are very similar throughout the grades, they just get a little more difficult and complicated as the grade level progresses. And that will tell you who you should be targeting to marketing your book to, not only for the reading level, but how you're going to pitch it to the schools.
Very good advice. My mother was a teacher, I was a teacher, and now I have a daughter who's a teacher. So we have a long line of educators in our family, and things are really different these days with what's required and all the red tape. And it's like being a doctor in the classroom with all the red tape that you have to, and the hoops that you have to jump through.
And a note on that is, because that's the reality today, anytime you can create additional resources to go with your book that teachers can use, if you're giving them a list of some of the standards that you reinforce, if you give them discussion questions about your book, if you give them vocabulary words, if that needs to be identified, or a glossary or references or other links to websites that will help the teachers, these are things that not only make it attractive for them to want to use it, but these are things they can insert into their lesson plans if they do need to submit it for somebody to look at. And they can show that they're using these additional resources. So you've got to kind of get in the head of a teacher at a grade level, and then that's how you produce those resources, and that's how you market that book.
Yes, and their time is so limited, and it's so helpful for you to make it as easy as possible for them. I know when I was in communications, we wanted to write those press releases so they could use them verbatim if they needed to, because the reporters didn't have time to write a lot of their own stories. So it's kind of the same kind of thing for teachers as well. Did you bring one of your books with you today?
Oh, I do. I have all 5 of my first series, and it's a series with Joey, Bobby, and Katie. They're typical American kids, and they get into mischief. They have adventures. There's some mystery, and they've been very popular in schools. I sell a lot of my books directly to schools. And then I have my nonfiction book called Schools, a Niche Market for Authors. And that includes all the strategies that I've used over the years. For somebody that doesn't understand how schools operate and what teachers need to be doing, it really gives a lot of good ideas of how you can make your book attractive to the education audience. And then I have my newest book that I co-wrote with Catherine Knight called Finding Family Treasure. And this is the one where the kids are looking up their family history. And this has been a fun book to write.
It sounds wonderful. Why don't you choose one of those and read a passage so that we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
I'm going to read out of this book, Finding Family Treasure. The students have already been assigned this assignment by their 5th grade teacher that they're going to look into their family history to find out who they are. And that will help them discover who we are as a country. So this is from chapter 9 called Gathering Family Data. Walking home that afternoon, Robbie was especially quiet. What do you think about today's assignment, Robbie? Mike asked Robbie. My parents already told me we're going to do some research about my birth family because you know I'm adopted. This is kind of cool. Robbie shrugged. I think it's kind of dumb. Plus, my dad doesn't like to talk about his family. This won't be easy. When Manuel got home that afternoon, he threw his backpack down on his bed and headed outside to the garden. How was school today? His grandmother asked. It was okay. We had a lady who talked to us about family histories, he said. It was kind of interesting, except that then our teacher gave us an assignment to talk to our relatives to learn more about who we are. His grandmother was silent while she pruned the lower stems on the tomato plants. She paused her work and said, "You know that your grandfather and I came from Mexico. We still have relatives in Veracruz, and some of our ancestors were influential people. You should talk to your grandfather about it. He's very proud of his family." "Nobody ever told me this," Manuel said. He sat on the ground next to his grandmother and began pulling weeds and thinking about what life must have been like in Mexico. He had never thought about that before. So that's kind of the tone of the book. And that particular chapter goes on as different students are going home and having different experiences talking to their parents and Skyping and Zooming and calling relatives in other parts of the country and pulling artifacts out of the attic and out of drawers and boxes to show military medals and wedding photos, even musical instruments, which is exactly what people would do when a child would ask them about their family history. You know, kids are visual learners. So when they see these things, then they can get excited about something that probably never occurred to them before, just like Manuel. I know as adults, and I say this all the time, and everybody I know says it, I wish I had asked my mother more about this. As adults, we treasure that. As kids, it's like, it's not important. It's just these old folks talking about the good old days. But we're trying to instill in them an interest in finding out where they came from, who their relatives are. And so that's the whole theme of the book. And there's, of course, some conflict in there. There's obviously a lot of diversity, a lot of multiculturalism. And that's kind of an underlying theme as well. We felt like that was a story that needed to be reinforced, especially today.
Sounds wonderful. And I can't wait to get a copy for my granddaughter, who is a voracious reader already at age 5. I think she would really love that. Where can people find your books, Jane?
Well, my books, my series are available on my website at janewoodbooks.com. We have a new website for the new book, Finding Family Treasure, and that's what it is, findingfamilytreasure.com. They're all available on Amazon. Mine are available as ebooks. They all are available as ebooks. A lot of local bookstores carry them. They're listed with Barnes and Noble. So if somebody really wants to find them, they can find them. But if they want to learn more about each book with a little more description, they could go to my website, janewoodbooks.com.
You know, I love when parents read to their children long after the children think that they're too old to be read to. And I hear about parents and teachers reading classics in the classroom, and I watch the children's faces when I see this happening, and it really means so much to have to not read to yourself, but to have, parents read to you. And I think that's one reason audiobooks are so popular now. I know when I ride my bike, that's what I listen to audiobooks. And it just is so soothing to have someone read to you instead of having to read the words to yourself. Maybe during this crazy time we're living in, you could tape yourself reading and have those in the classroom as well. It's just so encouraging.
I've had teachers tell me that what they like to do is read 2 or 3 chapters to their class after lunch. It's that after lunch period where everybody's kind of like, oh. And teachers have told me several will say, when I start reading, I'll do 2 or 3 chapters a day. And the kids groan, oh no, read the next chapter. And she says that kind of keeps them coming back for more. And what's ideal with my books, because it's a series, they'll read 1 in the classroom, and then the kids want to read the other 4. And that's always been a big selling factor for me. When I speak at a school and I talk about one particular book, then I frequently will sell the other 4 books to the students because they want to find out, just like we adults, what happens next? Where do they go after this? So reading aloud it can be very valuable as a learning resource. Because remember, a lot of kids have difficulty with reading. But if you can get them excited, if you can write a story that they want to find out what happens next, then they're going to be improving their reading skills. And that was my whole goal as a former teacher, to get kids reading.
You know, Jane, our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have any advice for these authors over 50 and above?
Certainly. I'll use the old Nike logo of just do it. I mean, I have taught classes out at the local university through the continuing ed on how to write a children's book and how to publish and how to market. And when they come in, they always say, oh, I have an idea for a book. And I said, well, have you started writing it? Just do it, is what I tell people. The other thing I would say is learn to network. Talk to other people who have been down that same path, because why reinvent the wheel? And I guarantee you, all of us have dealt with the same challenges that a new author is going to go through, particularly, in our senior years. It becomes a lot easier I think, to be able to go up and talk to people and to go to a conference and sit down with people you don't know and start the conversation. I know a lot of younger people are intimidated by that, but as at our age, it's much easier. And we figure, why not? They're right there. Let me ask a few questions, or pick up the phone and call someone, or send an email. I need help with this. Another valuable thing is to join organizations and go to webinars and events that you can learn from. As you mentioned, I'm the past president of the Florida Authors and Publishers Association, which is an affiliate of IBPA, Independent Book Publishers Association. They do a wonderful publishing university every year. They have wonderful resources. And because of the networking I've been able to do through these organizations and other ones, I always can call somebody or email somebody. I just did the other day. I needed to find out something about doing an EPUB. So I emailed someone who I knew had that same issue, and she's recommended somebody for me. So the networking is very valuable. Listening to webinars, Zoom meetings, and there's so much available out there today. It's just a matter of doing a Google search or connecting with some people and asking them, well, how did you learn about doing this? Or how do you do that? And let me tell you, YouTube videos. When I get stuck not knowing how to do something specific, you Google it, and frequently there's all kinds of YouTube videos about it. Not all of them are great, but usually you can find one that'll answer your question. And so there's just so much available today. Don't stop by saying, oh, I'm too old, I can't do this. I'm 20 years beyond being 50, and I'm still doing it and loving it, and it's keeping me out of trouble most of the time. So I would strongly encourage somebody 50 and over to write that book and just learn the ropes.
And we can continue writing into I call this life's sweetest third. And I've had authors reach out to me who are in their 80s and 90s, and they are writing beautiful work. So it's something like swimming that you can do all of your life.
Certainly.
Well, we've had a great visit with you today, Jane, and we appreciate you being one of our authors over 50.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it, and I always enjoy connecting with other authors and publishers and book designers and cover designers. And, the more you meet, the more you learn, the more you know. And so this has been good too. I've done quite a few podcasts and webinars, and it's all about, I think, helping others, because so many people have helped me. So if this helps other people, then I'm pleased to do it.
You've given us a lot to think about, a lot of good information, and I think everybody's going to rush out and get those books and find you online. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.